The wind coming down off the Laramie Mountains in the winter of 1879 had a voice. It did not whistle. It screamed, a hollow, tearing sound that stripped the warmth right out of a man's marrow. Eli Walker knew that sound better than he knew the voices of his own kin, dead and buried these 10 years past. He pulled the collar of his buffalo coat higher, the rough fur scratching against a beard that had gone uncut since the first snow fell in November. He was miles from the nearest settlement, checking a line of trap sets along the banks of a creek that had long since surrendered to the ice. The world here was gray and white, a monochromatic purgatory of granite and snow. His horse, a roan gelding named Silas, stepped high and careful, its breath blowing out in twin plumes of steam that vanished instantly in the gale. Eli saw the color before he saw the shape. It was an unnatural shade of blue, the color of a robin's egg, stark against the dirty white of the wind-scoured bank. He reined Silas in, his hand instinctively dropping to the stock of the Winchester in his saddle scabbard. A man did not survive long in this country by being careless, and anything out of place was usually a trap or a tragedy. He nudged the horse forward. The blue was fabric, a dress. Eli swung down from the saddle, his boots crunching through the crust of the snow. What he found made his stomach turn over, a sensation he had not felt since the war. It was a woman. She was lying half-curled in the lee of a fallen cottonwood trunk, her body trying to burrow into the dead wood for shelter. She was wearing nothing but a thin calico dress, torn at the hem and shoulder, and she was barefoot. Her feet were not white. They were a mottled, terrifying shade of purple and gray, the skin raw where the ice had cut them. He thought she was dead. He reached down, his gloved hand brushing the tangle of dark hair away from her face to check for a pulse at her throat. Her skin was cold as the iron of his rifle barrel, but when his fingers pressed against the hollow of her neck, he felt it, a flutter, faint, irregular, fighting a losing battle against the Wyoming winter. Eli did not waste time with words she could not hear. He stripped off his heavy buffalo coat. He lifted her. She weighed almost nothing, a fragility that frightened him more than the weight of a dead man would have. He wrapped her in the coat, pulling the heavy hide tight around her small frame, and hoisted her up onto the saddle. He mounted behind her, one arm locking her against his chest, feeling the shuddering, shallow rhythm of her breathing against his ribs. Silas seemed to understand the urgency. The horse turned back toward the timberline without a command, plodding upward through the drifts toward the cabin that sat hidden in a fold of the foothills. The cabin was a rough-hewn structure, logs chinked with mud and moss, built to withstand the apocalypse. Eli kicked the door shut behind them, shutting out the screaming wind. The silence of the room was immediate and heavy. He carried her to the bed in the corner, a frame of pine poles strung with rawhide and piled with quilts. He built up the fire in the stone hearth until the flames roared, casting long, dancing shadows against the walls. Then came the hard part. He had to get the wet, freezing clothes off her. He moved with a clinical detachment, his large, calloused hands working the buttons of the torn dress. When the fabric fell away, he saw that the cold was not the only thing that had assaulted her. There were bruises on her wrists, dark circles like manacles. There was a discoloration on her ribs, yellow and green, fading but distinct. Someone had handled her rough, and recently. He wrapped her in heated blankets, rubbing her arms and legs briskly to bring the blood back, but he left her feet alone. He knew better than to rub frostbite. That would only tear the damaged tissue. Instead, he soaked rags in cool water from the bucket near the fire and laid them gently over her feet, letting them thaw slowly, agonizingly. She did not wake. She moaned once, a low, guttural sound of distress, but her eyes remained closed. Eli sat in the rocking chair by the fire, cleaning his gun, watching her chest rise and fall. He did not sleep. He listened to the wind trying to tear the roof off, and he watched the stranger who had brought the trouble of the world into his sanctuary. Morning brought a gray, reluctant light to the window. The storm had broken, leaving behind a silence so deep it felt loud. The woman stirred. Eli was at the stove, frying salt pork in a cast-iron skillet. He heard the rustle of the corn-shuck mattress and turned. She was sitting up, clutching the quilt to her chin. Her eyes were wide, dark, and filled with a terror so sharp it looked like madness. She scrambled backward, pressing herself against the log wall, her gaze darting to the door, then to him, then to the knife on his belt. Eli turned back to the stove. He kept his voice low, a rumble that he hoped sounded like the earth rather than a threat. "You are safe," he said. He did not look at her. "Found you in the creek bed. You froze half to death." He heard her breathing, rapid and shallow. "My name is Eli Walker," he said. He plated the meat and a biscuit, poured coffee into a tin cup, and set it on the small table near the bed. Then he retreated to the far side of the room. "Eat." She stared at the food. Hunger warred with fear, and hunger won. She reached for the biscuit with a trembling hand. The quilt slipped, revealing her shoulder, and she gasped, yanking it back up. She realized then that she was naked beneath the blankets. Eli pointed to the foot of the bed. "My spare shirt is there. It is clean." She snatched the garment, a heavy flannel shirt, checkered red and black, and ducked under the covers to put it on. When she emerged, she looked like a child playing dress-up. The cuffs hung past her fingertips. The hem reached her knees, but the wool seemed to settle her. She wrapped her hands around the coffee cup, letting the steam hit her face. "What is your name?" Eli asked. She froze. The cup stopped halfway to her lips. Her eyes hardened, the terror replaced by a wall of stubborn silence. She shook her head once. "Suit yourself," Eli said. He sat in his chair and began to oil his boots. "I am not the law, and I am not asking for money." She watched him. He could feel her eyes on him, measuring the width of his shoulders, the scars on his knuckles, the way his gun belt hung on the peg by the door. He knew what she was seeing. A man who looked as rough as the land, a man who likely had blood on his hands. She wasn't wrong. "My feet," she whispered. Her voice was a rasp, unused and dry. "They will heal," Eli said. "Might lose a nail or two, but you keep them on their toes." She looked down at her bandaged feet. "Thank you." It was the only thing she said for 2 days. By the third afternoon, the larder was running low on fresh meat. The woman, he called her Miss in his head, for lack of anything else, was sleeping more comfortably now. The fever that had threatened on the first night had broken. She spent her waking hours sitting by the fire, staring into the flames, wrapped in his giant shirt. "I am going to check the snares," Eli told her. He put on his coat and took the Winchester. "Bolt the door behind me. Do not open it for anyone but me. I will knock 3 times. She nodded, her eyes wide again. She understood the necessity of bolts. Eli rode Silas up the ridgeline, keeping to the trees. The air was crisp, the sky a blinding, cloudless blue. He checked 2 traps, finding a snowshoe hare in one, stiff and frozen. He tied it to his saddle. He was turning back when he saw it. A mile down the valley, near the place where he had found her, a rider was moving slow. Eli pulled Silas into the shadow of a spruce stand and watched. The stranger was not a drifter. He was riding a tall bay horse, the kind that cost good money, and he was wearing a long, oilskin duster despite the dry cold. He was leaning down, studying the ground, tracking. Eli felt a cold prickle at the base of his neck. The wind had covered Eli's tracks from 3 days ago, but the man was thorough. He was quartering the ground, looking for a sign. He was a professional. The brothels in Cheyenne and Laramie hired men like this. Trackers, enforcers, men who treated women like chattel and kill orders like business contracts. If the girl had run, this was the dog sent to fetch her. Eli watched until the sun began to dip behind the peaks. The tracker made camp in the open, building a small fire. He wasn't leaving. He was waiting for a mistake. Eli turned Silas and picked his way back to the cabin, taking a circuitous route over rock shelves where his hooves would leave no prints. When he knocked 3 times, the bolt slid back instantly. The girl stood there, looking at him. She saw the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes kept flicking to the window. "What is it?" she asked. "Coyote." Eli lied. "Big one, prowling around." He cleaned the rabbit, the smell of blood filling the small room. She didn't flinch at the sight of the knife work. She had seen worse things than a dead rabbit. That night, Eli did not undress. He blew out the lantern but kept the fire low. He sat in the chair facing the door, his legs stretched out, the Winchester resting across his chest. "Why are you sleeping with your gun?" she asked from the darkness of the bed. "Habit," he said. "You are lying. Go to sleep, miss." She was quiet for a long time. Then, the rustle of the mattress. "I feel safe here," she said softly. "It smells like wood smoke. And safety." Eli closed his eyes, his finger resting on the trigger guard. "Safety is a temporary thing," he said to the darkness. "But sleep while you can." The next morning, the girl decided she was done being an invalid. Eli woke to the sound of a broom scratching against the rough plank floor. She was sweeping, hobbling slightly on her healing feet, still wearing his shirt, which served as a dress. "You should be resting," Eli grumbled. Sitting up, "I have rested enough," she said. "I am not a freeloader, Mr. Walker." "Eli, Eli," she tested the name. "I can cook, if you have flour." They fell into a rhythm. It was a strange, domestic dance for two people who knew nothing of each other. She made biscuits that were lighter than the rocks he usually baked. She tidied the clutter of his bachelor existence, straightening the tins on the shelf, folding the blankets, scrubbing the table with sand and water until the grease of 5 years was gone. He watched her when he thought she wasn't looking. She was young, perhaps 20 or 21, with a face that could have been pretty if it wasn't so haunted. Her eyes were the color of wet slate, and they were always moving, always checking the corners of the room. In the evenings, the silence between them began to change. It wasn't the fearful silence of the first day, but a companionable quiet. He mended a bridle. She patched the tear in her dress, though she continued to wear his shirt. "My stepfather," she said suddenly one evening. The fire popped, sending a spark onto the hearth. Eli did not look up from the leather he was stitching. "What about him?" "He was a sodbuster, Kansas. He drank up the seed money." She paused, her needle stilling in the fabric. "He owed a debt, $300. He told me to pack a bag and said I was going to work in a hotel in Cheyenne to pay it off. He put me on the wagon himself." Eli pulled the awl through the leather. "He sold you. He gave me away," she corrected, her voice brittle, "like a horse with a bad leg. But the place he sent me, it wasn't a hotel." She stopped there. She wouldn't say the word. She wouldn't talk about what happened after she got off that wagon. "You are here now," Eli said. It was inadequate, but it was all he had. "Yes," she said. "I am here." 2 days later, the sky turned a bruised purple and the wind died. The silence that followed was heavy, pressurized. "Storm is coming," Eli said, looking out the small window. "A bad one." He spent the afternoon chopping wood, stacking it high against the cabin wall. She helped, carrying the smaller splits, ignoring his protests. By dusk, the snow began. It wasn't the soft flakes of a Christmas card. It was a driving sheet of white that erased the mountains, then the trees, then the barn. They were snowed in. For 3 days, the world ended at the cabin door. The wind piled drifts 10 feet high against the north wall. They lived by the light of the fire and the oil lamp. The cabin, once a place of lonely existence for Eli, became a world of two. They ate meals with their knees almost touching under the small table. He watched her brush the snow from his coat when he came in from checking the horses in the attached lean-to. He found himself fixing the loose leg on the rocking chair she favored, shaping a new dowel from a piece of ash wood, shaving it down until the fit was perfect. She watched his hands. "You have good hands," she said. "Gentle hands." Eli looked at his knuckles, scarred from fights in saloons he couldn't remember and a war he couldn't forget. "These hands have done bad things," he said. "Maybe," she said. reaching out and daring to touch the back of his hand with her fingertips. Her skin was rough from the broom, but warm. "But they fixed my chair." He didn't pull away. He sat there, the wood shaving curling on the floor, feeling the heat of her touch go all the way up his arm. The fourth night of the storm, the wind died down, leaving a heavy, suffocating stillness. They went to bed early to save oil. Eli lay on his pallet on the floor. He had insisted she take the bed, listening to the logs settle. He was drifting into a light doze when the scream cut through the dark. It was a raw, animal sound. Eli was on his feet, the pistol in his hand. Before he was fully awake, he spun toward the bed. She was thrashing, tangled in the quilt, fighting an invisible enemy. "No!" she shrieked. "No, please, not the cellar!" "No!" Eli dropped the gun and grabbed her shoulders. "Wake up! You are safe! Wake up!" She struck out, her fist catching him in the jaw. But he held on. He pulled her against him, pinning her arms to her sides. She was sobbing now, great heaving gasps that shook her entire body. "Shh," he whispered, his chin resting on the top of her head. "It is just a dream. You are in the mountains. You are with Eli." She collapsed against him, burying her face in the rough wool of his union suit. He sat on the edge of the bed, holding her, rocking her slightly as one would a child. "He found me," she choked out. "In the dream, he found me." "Who?" "The man," she whispered. "Not the owner. The owner just took the money. The man, the one who makes sure you don't run, the one who breaks the girls who fight." Eli felt a cold rage solidify in his gut. It was a hard, heavy stone. "The tracker," he said. She pulled back, looking at him in the moonlight that filtered through the window. "You saw him? You saw him on the ridge?" Eli didn't lie. "I saw a man who looks at the ground too much." "It is him," she said, her voice trembling. "His name is Silas. No, not like your horse. His name is Grimes. He uses a whip. He likes it." She touched her ribs, where the yellow bruises were fading. "He said if I ever ran, he would cut the tendons in my ankles so I would have to crawl." Eli's hands balled into fists so tight the knuckles turned white. He thought of her feet, the way she had stumbled through the snow, the desperation that would drive a woman to run barefoot into a Wyoming winter rather than stay. "He is waiting," Eli said. "He is waiting for the snow to clear so he can find the trail." "He will kill you," she said, gripping his arms. "He is a devil. Eli, we have to run." "I am done running," Eli said quietly. He held her until the sobbing stopped. He smoothed the hair back from her forehead. "Go to sleep," he said. "I will watch." She didn't want to let go, but exhaustion pulled her down. She curled up, pulling the collar of his red and black shirt up over her nose, breathing in his scent. Within minutes, her breathing evened out. Eli watched her for a long moment. He memorized the curve of her cheekbone, the dark lash against her pale skin. She was the first gentle thing that had been in this cabin in 5 years. He stood up slowly. He moved with the silence of a ghost. He was dressed in dark, wool trousers, 2 shirts, and a heavy buffalo coat. He pulled on his boots. He took the Winchester from the wall, checking the load. He checked his Colt revolver. Spinning the cylinder, he looked at her one last time. "Sleep well, Clara," he whispered, giving her a name she hadn't given him, a name that belonged to his grandmother. It seemed to fit. He slipped out into the night. The air was brittle with cold, likely 20 degrees below zero. The moon was high and full, turning the snow-covered valley into a landscape of blue silver. Eli saddled Silas, his hands moving surely despite the numbness in his fingers. He did not ride the trail. He rode the ridge line, the high ground, pushing the horse through deep drifts. He knew where the tracker would be. A man like that wouldn't give up. He would be camped near the mouth of the canyon, waiting for the sun to melt the crust so he could cut for signs. It took 2 hours to reach the spot. Eli tied Silas deep in the timber and moved the last 300 yards on foot. He moved belly down in the snow, a shadow moving within shadows. He saw the camp, It was tucked under a rock overhang. A small fire had burned down to coals. The horse was picketed on a long line. The man, Grimes, was asleep in a bedroll, his hat pulled over his eyes, a carbine leaning against the saddle nearby. Eli could have turned back. He could have waited, but he remembered the bruises on her wrists. He remembered the terror in her voice when she talked about the cellar. A man who did that to women did not deserve a warning. He did not deserve a fair fight. Eli found a position behind a granite boulder, 40 yards out. He rested the barrel of the Winchester on the rock. He cocked the hammer. The metallic click was loud in the frozen air. Grimes moved fast. He sat up, throwing the blanket off, his hand grabbing for the carbine. "Don't!" Eli said. His voice carried across the clearing, flat and final. Grimes froze. He squinted into the darkness. "Who's out there?" "The end of the road," Eli said. Grimes laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "You got the girl, you give her back, and I let you walk away. Sodbuster! She ain't worth dying for. She's just a $2 whore who owes a debt." Eli sighted down the barrel. The front sight settled on the center of the man's chest. "She is a free woman," Eli said. Grimes made his move. He rolled, bringing the carbine up, firing blindly into the trees. The bullet chipped the rock inches from Eli's face, sending stone splinters into his cheek. Eli didn't flinch. He squeezed the trigger. The Winchester roared, a thunderclap that shattered the mountain silence. Grimes was thrown backward as if kicked by a mule. He hit the rock wall and slid down, the carbine falling from his hands. He gasped once, a wet, bubbling sound, and then the silence rushed back in. Heavier than before, the sun was just cresting the eastern peaks, painting the snow in streaks of violent pink and gold. Eli stood up. He walked into the camp, looking down at the man who would never hurt anyone again. He felt no guilt. He felt only the cold, and the need to get back to the cabin before she woke up. He turned his back on the dead man and began the long walk back to his horse. The shot that killed the tracker Grimes had echoed like a crack of doom, but the silence that followed was heavier. Eli Walker stood over the body for only a moment, watching the steam rise from the cooling blood into the frigid dawn air. He felt no triumph. It was a chore, grim and necessary, like putting down a horse with a broken leg. Only this beast had walked on 2 legs and carried a whip. Eli worked quickly. The sun was threatening to breach the peaks, and he needed the body gone. He dragged the man by the collar of his duster, the heels of the dead man's boots carving twin furrows in the snow. There was a fissure in the granite 1/2 mile up the ridge, a deep, dark throat of rock that plummeted down into a tangle of scree and timber where neither man nor wolf ventured often. Eli pushed the body over the edge. He threw the saddle and the carbine after it. He slapped the bay horse on the rump, sending it galloping toward the lowlands. A loose horse would eventually be found, but it would tell no tales. The ride back to the cabin was a blur of exhaustion. When Eli reached the creek that ran 300 yards from his door, he slid from Silas's back. The cold was biting, pressing against his skin like a knife blade, but he stripped off his buffalo coat. He saw it then, a spray of crimson on the rough wool of the sleeve, dark and wet. He knelt by the creek. He broke the thin layer of ice with his fist, plunging his hands into the numbing water. He scrubbed at the wool with a handful of sand, working the stain until his fingers were raw and red, until the water ran clear. He washed his face, the shock of the cold tightening his skin, washing away the gunpowder grit and the sweat of the kill. He did not feel clean, but he looked at it. He entered the cabin as the first true light of morning turned the window into a square of pale gray. Clara was asleep. She lay curled on her side. Her dark hair spilled across the pillowcase he had sewn from a flour sack. One of her hands rested near her face. The fingers relaxed, no longer clenched in the terror that had defined her arrival. Eli hung his coat on the peg, moving with the practiced silence of a hunter. He added a log to the fire, banking the coals so they would last until she woke. Then he sat in his chair, watching her chest rise and fall, and waited for the trembling in his own hands to stop. She did not stir. She did not know that while she dreamed of safety, he had murdered a man to ensure it. The winter died hard in the high country. It clung to the shadows of the pines and hid in the deep ravines. But the sun began to show its strength. The drifts slumped into heavy, wet mounds, and the creek swelled with meltwater, roaring against its banks with a brown, frothy violence. Clara healed with the season. The bruising on her wrists faded to a faint yellow memory, then vanished. Her feet, though scarred, toughened enough to walk across the floorboards without wincing. She had stopped wearing his shirt as a dress, having salvaged enough fabric from the lining of an old blanket to fashion a skirt, though she still wore his flannel shirt tucked into it, the sleeves rolled up to her elbows. "You should go," Eli said one morning in late April. He was oiling the door hinges, refusing to look at her. "The pass is clear. I can give you the roan horse and $20. It will get you to Laramie." Clara was kneading dough on the table, her hands dusted with white flour. She did not stop her rhythm. "And what is in Laramie for me, Eli?" "A train," he said, "to somewhere else." "I have been somewhere else," she said, flipping the dough. "I did not like it." "This is no place for a woman," he argued, though his heart was not in the words. "It is hard work. It is lonely." She stopped then. She turned to face him, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead with the back of her wrist. "I have known loneliness in a room full of men," she said quietly. "This silence, this is not lonely, this is peace. Unless you want me to leave. Unless I am a burden." Eli looked at her, really looked at her. She was not the broken bird he had pulled from the snow. She was steel-wrapped in soft skin, standing firm in his kitchen. "You are not a burden," he said, his voice rough. "Then I stay," she said. "We need to plant potatoes. The ground is soft enough." She stayed, and with her staying, the cabin changed. It was no longer just a shelter. It became a home. She claimed the corner near the window, hanging a piece of calico she had found in his trunk to create a partition. It was a small thing, but it defined her space. Behind it, she kept a comb, a ribbon, and a small jar of wildflowers she had gathered. Eli built her a clothesline from the corner of the cabin to a sturdy lodgepole pine. He watched her from the barn as she hung the wash, the sheets snapping in the mountain breeze. She began to sing as she worked. It was a low, mournful tune at first, something about a sailor and a storm. But as the weeks passed, the songs changed. She sang hymns she must have learned as a child, her voice clear and true, cutting through the mountain silence. The sound of it terrified Eli. It terrified him because he liked it. He found himself lingering on the porch, whittling aimlessly, just to catch the melody drifting through the open door. It made him want things he had sworn off years ago: tenderness, laughter, a future that wasn't measured in trapping seasons. One evening, after a dinner of venison stew and cornbread, Eli sat by the fire, working saddle soap into the leather of his bridle. The firelight cast deep shadows across his face, highlighting the jagged white scar that ran from his hairline to his eyebrow, a souvenir from a knife fight in Abilene 10 years prior. Clara sat opposite him, mending a tear in his spare trousers. She set the needle down and watched his hands. "Does it hurt?" she asked. Eli looked up, startled. "What?" "Your hand," she said. She reached out, her movement slow and deliberate, giving him time to pull away. She touched his knuckles. They were swollen and scarred, the skin thick and callous. Eli flinched. It was an involuntary reaction, a muscle memory of violence. He expected pain, or he expected to inflict it. He pulled his hand back sharply, dropping the bridle. "Don't," he said, the word coming out harsher than he intended. Clara didn't retreat. She kept her hand extended, suspended in the air between them. "I was not going to hurt you, Eli." "They are ugly hands," he muttered, picking up the bridle and scrubbing at it vigorously. "They are not made for holding." "They held me," she said softly, "when I was dying in the snow. They carried me." Eli could not look at her. The shame burned in his gut, hot and acidic. If she knew what these hands had done, not just saving her, but the lives they had taken, the blood they had spilled to keep her safe, she would not want to touch them. She would run screaming down the mountain. "It is getting late," he said abruptly. He stood up and went out to check the horses, leaving her sitting by the fire, her hand slowly dropping back to her lap. Summer arrived in a rush of green. The valley floor exploded with clover and Indian paintbrush. The creek settled into a steady, crystalline hum. Eli woke early, as he always did. He took a bar of lye soap and a towel and went down to the river. The water was still shockingly cold. Snowmelt from the high peaks, but it woke a man up. He stripped to his waist, splashing the water over his face and chest, scrubbing at his skin as if he could wash away the sins of the past decade. He did not hear her approach. He was standing on the bank, the water dripping from his beard, drying his face with the rough towel. The morning sun hit his back, warming the muscles. When he lowered the towel, he saw her. She was standing 20 yards away, near the garden patch he had fenced in for her. She was holding a basket of greens, but she wasn't looking at the vegetables. She was looking at him. She was looking at the width of his shoulders, the taper of his waist, the scars that mapped his torso like a history of violence, a bullet graze on his ribs, a knife slash across his shoulder blade. But there was no revulsion in her gaze. There was a heat, a curiosity that made the air between them suddenly thin and electric. Eli stood frozen. He felt exposed, not just physically, but entirely. He should have covered himself. He should have turned away. But he didn't. He let her look, and for a moment, he looked back. He saw the flush rise on her neck, the way her lips parted slightly. She realized he was watching her watching him. She gasped, her eyes widening, and she turned quickly, hurrying back toward the cabin, the basket of greens clutched tight to her chest. That night, the cabin felt smaller. The air was thick with things unsaid. They ate in silence, the scrape of forks on tin plates sounding like gunshots. "The garden is coming in good," Eli said, his voice sounding unnatural to his own ears. "Yes," she said, not looking up. "The lettuce is strong." She reached for the salt cellar at the same moment he reached for his coffee cup. Their hands brushed. It was the barest contact, skin against skin, but it sent a jolt through Eli that nearly made him drop the cup. He pulled back. She pulled back. Their eyes met across the table, and for the first time, Eli saw something other than gratitude in her gaze. He saw a question. He saw a want that mirrored the ache in his own chest. He stood up, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "I need to check the fence line," he said. "Elk have been pressing it." He fled the cabin. He walked until his lungs burned, trying to outpace the desire that was threatening to unmake him. He was a killer. He was a man with a price on his head, buried under a decade of silence. He had no right to want a woman like Clara. He had no right to drag her into the darkness of his life. He built the fence higher the next week. He worked with a manic intensity, splitting rails and driving posts until his muscles screamed. Clara watched him from the porch. She seemed to have found her footing again. The laughter returned, a bright, bubbling sound that caught him off guard. She laughed when the chickens chased a grasshopper. She laughed when she tripped over her own skirt. But Eli remained distant. He slept with one eye open. He watched the tree line constantly, his hand never far from the Winchester. The tracker Grimes was dead. But Grimes had employers, and men who hired trackers did not simply forget about their property. Clara sensed his tension. She stopped singing as much. She watched him watching the woods. One afternoon, while Eli was chopping wood behind the cabin, Clara went into the barn to look for a needle she had dropped. She thought she might have left it in the leather pouch where Eli kept his repair kit. She saw his saddlebags hanging over the stall rail. They were dusty, leather cracked from years of use. She unbuckled the flap. Reaching inside, her fingers brushed something stiff and dry. She pulled it out. It was a bundle of rags. They were stained a dark, rusty brown. Blood, dried, old blood, but a lot of it. Clara stood in the dim light of the barn, holding the rags. She knew what blood looked like. She knew what it meant. She remembered the night of the storm, the night she had dreamed of the tracker, The night Eli had slipped out with his rifle. She remembered him returning at dawn, though she had pretended to be asleep. She remembered the smell of copper and cold air. He had killed him. She didn't need to ask. The realization settled over her with a terrifying clarity. Eli Walker, the man who fixed her chair and built her a clothesline, the man who treated her frostbite with the tenderness of a mother, had ridden out into the freezing dark and killed the man who hunted her. She shoved the rags back into the bag and buckled it shut. Her heart was hammering against her ribs. She wasn't afraid of Eli. That was the strange part. She should have been afraid of a killer, but she wasn't. She felt a fierce, protective swelling in her chest. He had damned himself for her. She walked out into the sunlight. Eli was splitting a log, the axe rising and falling in a rhythmic arc. She watched him, wondering how heavy that secret was, wondering how far he would go. She knew the answer. He would go all the way. The storm broke 3 days later. It was a summer thunderstorm, violent and sudden. The sky turned a bruised purple, and the thunder rolled down the valley like artillery fire. They were eating supper when the lightning struck a pine tree just up the ridge. The flash was blinding, turning the room stark white for a split second, followed instantly by a crack of thunder that shook the floorboards. Clara screamed. It was an instinctual sound, born of the trauma she carried, the fear of sudden violence. She leaped from her chair, scrambling away from the window. Eli was there before the echo died. He caught her. He wrapped his arms around her, pulling her against his chest. "I have you," he said. "It is just thunder. I have you." She clung to him, burying her face in his neck. She was shaking, but as the fear subsided, something else took its place. The feel of his arms, hard and capable. The scent of him, wood smoke, tobacco, and the clean, masculine smell of rain. She pulled back slightly, looking up at him. The room was dark, lit only by the flickering firelight and the occasional flash from the window. His eyes were dark pools, wide and vulnerable. "Clara," he whispered. She didn't think so. She surged up, pressing her lips to his. It was not a gentle kiss. It was desperate. It was the collision of two lonely people who had been circling each other for months. Eli froze for a heartbeat, and then he broke. He kissed her back, his hands tangling in her hair, his mouth devouring hers. He pulled her closer, his body hard against hers. For a moment, there was nothing but the storm outside and the fire inside. Then Eli tore himself away. He stumbled back, his chest heaving. He looked at her with a mixture of hunger and horror. "No," he rasped. "No, we cannot." Clara stood there, her lips swollen, her heart racing. "Why?" she demanded. "Don't tell me you don't feel it. Eli, don't lie to me." "I feel it," he said, his voice agonizingly honest. "I feel it every time you walk into a room. I feel it when I sleep. But you don't know who I am." "I know who you are," she said, stepping toward him. "You are the man who saved me." "I am a murderer," he shouted. The confession hung in the air, silencing the thunder. Eli turned away, gripping the mantelpiece until his knuckles turned white. "My name is not Eli Walker. It is Elias Kane. 10 years ago, in Kansas, I killed a man. Not in war, not for duty. I killed him because he cheated me with cards and laughed about it. I beat him to death with a bottle in my bare hands in a room full of witnesses." He lowered his head. "I have been running ever since. I am a wanted man. Clara, the law does not forget. The rope is waiting for me." He turned to face her, his eyes pleading. "You have to leave. You have to go before they find me, because if they find me, and you are here, they will destroy you too." Clara watched him. She saw the fear in him, not fear of dying, but fear for her. He was trying to save her again, this time from himself. She took a step forward, then another. She stopped inches from him. "Is that it?" she asked. "Is that a terrible secret?" "It is enough to hang a man," he said. "And the tracker?" she asked quietly. "The man on the ridge?" Eli went still. "You know, I found the rags," she said. You killed him for me. Yes, you killed me, she repeated. And you want me to leave because you think you are dangerous. She reached out, taking his face in her hands. His skin was rough, the beard scratching her palms. You are dangerous, Eli, but you are good, and I am not going anywhere. Clara, he groaned. You don't understand. She silenced him with a kiss. This one was different. It was slow, deliberate. It was a claim. She pulled his shirt from his trousers, her hands sliding up his back, tracing the scars she had seen by the river. I am staying, she whispered against his mouth. I am choosing this. She stepped back and began to undo the buttons of her blouse. The firelight caught the curve of her throat, the pale slope of her shoulder. Eli watched her, his breath catching in his throat. He felt unworthy. He felt like a man standing at the gates of paradise with blood on his boots. But he could not turn away. When she stood before him, stripped of the layers of wool and cotton, she was beautiful and scarred and real. It was not a dream. She was a woman who had survived hell and walked into his cabin. Eli reached out, his hands trembling. He touched her waist, his thumbs brushing the skin. She shivered, but she stepped closer, pressing herself against him. He lifted her then, carrying her to the bed in the corner. He laid her down on the quilts. He undressed quickly, shedding the clothes that smelled of the barn and the work. When he joined her, the bed ropes creaked. It was tentative at first. He was terrified of hurting her. He remembered where she had come from. He remembered the bruises. He moved with a restraint that cost him everything. His touches feather-light, asking permission with every movement. But Clara did not want feathers. She wanted him. She wrapped her legs around him, pulling him down, her nails digging into his shoulders. She needed to feel his weight, his reality. She needed to know that he was here, and she was here, and they were alive. The tentativeness broke. The hunger took over. It was raw and urgent, a desperate seeking of comfort in the dark. They moved together in the rhythm of the storm outside, seeking to erase the memories of brothels and bar fights, of snow and blood. Eli buried his face in her neck, breathing her name like a prayer. Clara held him tight, anchoring him to the earth. In the firelight, two broken things fitted themselves together and found, for the first time in a long time, that they were whole. The morning sun did not intrude. It announced itself with a pale, golden clarity that shattered the gray gloom of the previous storm. Clara woke slowly, surfacing from a sleep so deep it felt like a drug. She was alone in the bed. The spot beside her was cool to the touch, the indentation of his head on the pillow the only proof he had been there at all. She sat up, pulling the heavy red and black flannel shirt tighter around her shoulders. It smelled of him, of pine pitch, gun oil, and the unique, salty scent of a man who worked hard in cold air. She swung her legs over the side of the mattress, her bare feet finding the rough-hewn floorboards. The cold was still there, lingering in the corners of the room, but the fire in the hearth had been built up, cracking and popping with a cheerful vigor. She went to the window. Eli was outside. He had stripped to his undershirt despite the chill, the white cotton damp with sweat and clinging to his back. He was standing by the chopping block, a massive round of oak that looked as old as the mountain itself. A pile of split pine lay to his left, but he was working on something harder now. He swung the maul with a fluid, terrifying grace. It was a motion of pure kinetic efficiency, the rise of the heavy iron head, the pause at the apex, and the driving, devastating downward stroke that split the wood with a sharp report that echoed off the canyon walls. He paused, leaning on the handle of the maul, and wiped his forehead with his forearm. He looked toward the cabin. He saw her standing in the window, framed by the rough logs, wearing his shirt, her hair a dark tangle around her shoulders. And then, he did something she had never seen. The corner of his mouth twitched. The hard line of his jaw softened. His eyes, usually so guarded and flat, crinkled at the corners. Eli Walker grinned. It wasn't a polite smile. It was a boyish, sudden expression of pure delight that took 10 years off his face and made Clara's breath catch in her throat. He raised a hand in a wave, a simple, domestic gesture that felt more intimate than the act of love they had shared the night before. Clara pressed her hand against the glass, her heart hammering a new rhythm. She realized then that the winter was truly over. The days that followed were a suspension of time, a stolen season between the violence of the past and the uncertainty of the future. They moved around the cabin with a new fluidity, a dance of two bodies that had learned the magnetic pull of the other. The silence that had once been a wall between them became a bridge. They did not need to speak to understand. Clara took over the mending. She sat on the porch in the afternoons, the sun warming the wood beneath her skirts, her needle flashing in the light. She repaired the tears in his coats, reinforced the buttons on his trousers, and darned his wool socks. It was humble work, but she treated it like a sacrament. Every stitch was a way of claiming him, of weaving herself into the fabric of his life. One evening, as the twilight settled blue and heavy over the valley, Eli sat on the edge of the porch, cleaning his revolver. He finished, holstered the weapon, and watched Clara struggling to braid her hair without a mirror. Her fingers were clumsy with fatigue. "Turn around," he said softly. Clara hesitated, then turned her back to him. She felt him move closer, the heat of his body radiating against her spine. "I used to braid rope," he said, his voice low, almost an apology. "For the lariats, it cannot be so different." His hands, so large and scarred, so capable of breaking bone, touched her hair with a reverence that made her shiver. He separated the strands. He was clumsy at first, his fingers too thick for the delicate work, fumbling with the silkiness of her hair. He muttered a curse under his breath when he pulled too tight, but he did not stop. Clara sat perfectly still, eyes closed, feeling the calluses on his fingertips brush against the nape of her neck. It was an intimacy far more terrifying than nakedness. It was the intimacy of being cared for. "There," he said finally. She reached back. It was a crooked braid, lopsided and a little loose, tied off with a strip of leather he had cut from a spare rein. "It is beautiful," she whispered. He rested his forehead against her shoulder for just a moment, a heavy, silent weight. "It is a mess," he murmured into her dress, "but it keeps the hair out of your eyes." That night, the cabin felt too small, the air too thick with the heat of the fire. They took a quilt and walked out into the meadow. The moon was a sliver of bone in a sky so crowded with stars it looked like spilled sugar. The ground was cold, but the quilt was thick. They lay on their backs, watching the constellations wheel overhead. Eli pointed out the North Star, the bear, the hunter. His voice was a low rumble in the darkness. "I used to navigate by them," he said. "When I was driving cattle, before—" "Before what?" Clara asked, turning on her side to look at him. "Before I got lost," he said. She moved over him then, blocking out the stars. She kissed the scar on his forehead, the rough stubble on his cheek, the hollow of his throat. This time, there was no desperation. There was no frantic need to forget. There was only a slow, deliberate memorization of the other. He undressed her with shaking hands. The cold mountain air bit at their skin, but where they touched, there was fire. Her breath fogged in the moonlight, mingling with him. When he entered her, he made a sound in his throat, a sound of surrender. He moved slowly, holding her face in his hands, looking into her eyes with an intensity that stripped her bare. He was trembling. This man who had killed a tracker at 400 yards without blinking. He was trembling because she was real, and she was his. And he was terrified he would break her. "Clara," he whispered, his voice cracking. "I am here," she answered, moving with him, matching his rhythm, the grass beneath the quilt crunching softly. "I am right here." But the world outside their valley did not stop turning just because they had found peace. 20 miles away, in the muddy thoroughfare of Laramie, trouble was brewing like a summer storm. The snow melt had cleared the high passes, and with the open roads came the drift of humanity. Miners, whores, cattlemen, and the law. The body of Grimes, the tracker, had not stayed hidden. A rock slide, triggered by the thaw, had spit him out of the fissure. A prospector had found him, broken and frozen, with a bullet hole through the center of his chest. The prospector had brought the body down on a mule, looking for a reward. He dumped the corpse on the boardwalk outside the marshal's office. A crowd gathered. Men spat tobacco juice and speculated. It was a clean kill, they said, a rifle shot, a professional job. The saloon that night was thick with smoke and the smell of wet wool. At the bar stood a man who did not belong to the town. He wore a long duster coat and a low-crowned hat. His name was Vance, and he made his living hunting men who did not want to be found. He had been tracking Grimes, mostly because Grimes owed him money, but now the game had changed. Grimes was hunting a girl, Vance said to the bartender, his voice carrying over the murmur of the room. And the man who took her, Sheriff Brady was sitting at a corner table. He was an older man, with a mustache the color of iron and eyes that had seen too much of the frontier to be surprised by anything. But when Vance spoke, Brady looked up. The man who killed him used a Winchester, Vance continued, spinning a coin on the bar top. Long range, one shot, and he rides a roan horse. A trapper saw him up near the Iron Creek line. Lots of men ride roan horses, the bartender said. Not like this one, Vance said. This one has a scar, a big white line, right here. He drew a finger across his forehead. Sheriff Brady's chair scraped against the floor. The room went quiet. Brady stood up, hooking his thumbs in his gun belt. You describe a man named Elias Kane, the sheriff said. Vance stopped the coin. He turned slowly. Kane? The Kansas killer? Disappeared 10 years ago, Brady said. After he beat a man to paste in Abilene. I was a deputy there. I saw the body. I never forgot the face. Well, Vance smiled. A predator bearing teeth. If Elias Kane is up in the hills, he is worth $2,000. Dead or alive. Mostly dead. He is my collar, Brady said, his voice hard. I am riding out at first light. You stay out of my way, bounty hunter. Vance just picked up his coin. It is a free country. Sheriff. News travels fast in the high country, carried by the wind or by men who move faster than the law. Eli had ridden to the trading post at the crossroads, a half-day ride to buy flour and coffee. He had intended to be gone for 4 hours. He came back with the supplies, but his face was pale beneath his tan. He rode Silas hard, the horse's flanks heaving as they crested the ridge above the cabin. Clara was in the garden, hoeing the rows of potatoes. She stood up, shading her eyes, smiling as he approached. The smile died when she saw his face. Eli swung down from the saddle before the horse had fully stopped. He grabbed her arm, not gently. Inside, he said. Now. He dragged her into the cabin and bolted the door. He went to the window, peering out through the crack in the shutter. What is it? Clara asked, fear spiking in her chest. Is it the owner? Worse, Eli said. He turned to her. They found the body, Grimes, and someone talked. They know I am here. Who knows? The law, and a man named Vance, a bounty hunter. Eli paced the small room, a caged animal. They know my name, Clara, my real name. We have to leave, Clara said, grabbing his arm. We can pack the horses. We can go west, over the divide, Utah, Oregon. No, Eli stopped, shaking his head. We would never make the pass with the snow this deep on the north face. And they have fresh horses. They would run us down in the open within 2 days. We would be cut to pieces on the flats. So we stay? She whispered. We stay and wait for them. We stay, Eli said. His voice shifted, becoming cold and tactical. This is my ground. I know every rock, every tree. If they want me, they have to come through the funnel of the canyon. I can hold them. He went to the corner of the room, where the floorboards were loose. He pried them up with a knife. Beneath the floor was a shallow pit wrapped in oilcloth. He pulled out a second rifle, a Sharps buffalo gun, and a box of heavy ammunition. He pulled out a second revolver, a Navy Colt, lighter than his own. Can you shoot? He asked her. I shot a snake once, with a shotgun. Eli thrust the Navy Colt into her hands. It was heavy, smelling of grease. A snake is a small target. A man is bigger, but a man shoots back. He spent the afternoon drilling her. He did not let her fire the weapons. The sound would carry, but he taught her the mechanics. How to load the cylinder. How to cock the hammer without shaking. How to stand so the recoil didn't knock her off her feet. "Do not pull the trigger," he told her, his hands covering hers on the grip. "Squeeze it, like you are squeezing a lemon. If you pull, you miss. If you miss, you die." Clara's hands were shaking, but she nodded. She looked at the gun, then at him. "I won't miss," she said. Night fell like a shroud. They did not light the fire. They ate cold biscuits and jerky in the dark. Eli sat by the window, the Sharps rifle across his knees. Clara sat on the bed, the Colt beside her. Eli dozed fitfully. Around midnight, he began to twitch. His breath came in short, sharp gasps. "No," he muttered. "No, stay down, stay down." Clara moved to him. She knelt beside his chair, putting her hands on his knees. "Eli, Eli, wake up!" He jerked awake, swinging the barrel of the rifle toward her before he recognized her face. He froze, his eyes wild, sweat dripping from his nose. He lowered the gun slowly, his chest heaving. "I saw him," he whispered. "The man in Kansas, the one I killed. It was a long time ago," Clara said soothingly. "He was laughing," Eli said, staring into the dark. "He cheated me, took my money, mocked my father's name. I just wanted to hurt him. I didn't mean to. I didn't stop hitting him. I couldn't stop." He looked at his hands, the knuckles white in the gloom. "I am a monster. Clara, that is what they say. That is what I am." "You are not," she said fiercely. She took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. "A monster would have left me in the snow. A monster would have taken what he wanted and thrown me away. You are the man who braided my hair. You are the man who built me a garden. I have blood on me," he choked out. "Then we will wash it off," she said. "Together." He leaned into her touch, closing his eyes. "I want to be the kind of man you think I am," he whispered. "I want that more than I want to live." "Then be him," she said. "Be him for me." They waited. The dawn came gray and silent. At mid-morning, the dogs in the distance began to bark. Eli stood up. He checked the load in the Sharps. "They are here," he said. He looked out. 4 riders were coming up the trail. They moved slowly, scanning the trees. The man in the lead wore a tin star on his vest. Sheriff Brady, behind him were 2 deputies, and trailing them, a man in a duster who rode with an arrogant slouch. "Vance." "Stay inside," Eli said. "Keep the Colt hidden in your skirt. If they come through the door, you shoot the first one. Do not hesitate." "What are you going to do?" Clara asked, her voice high and tight. "I am going to talk," Eli said. He stepped out onto the porch. He did not raise the rifle, but he held it in the crook of his arm, looking relaxed and lethal. "That is far enough," Eli called out. His voice echoed off the canyon walls. The riders pulled up 30 yards away. Sheriff Brady squinted, tilting his hat back. "Elias Kane," Brady said. "It has been a long ride." "Name is Walker," Eli said calmly. "And you are trespassing." "I have a warrant for Elias Kane," Brady said, reaching into his coat. "Murder, Kansas. 1869, and suspicion of the murder of a man named Grimes. 3 days past. Don't know any Kane," Eli said. "And I don't know any Grimes. I am a trapper. I have been on this land for 5 years." "You fit the description," Vance called out, grinning. "The scar, the size, the attitude." "A lot of men have scars," Eli said. "And a lot of men don't like strangers riding up on their porch." Brady looked past Eli, toward the door. "Who's inside?" "Walker." "My wife," Eli said. The lie came smooth as oil. "Wife?" Brady raised an eyebrow. "Elias Kane didn't have a wife. Send her out." Eli hesitated. If he refused, they would start shooting. He nodded once. "Clara!" Clara stepped out. She had smoothed her hair. She wore the skirt she had made and his shirt. She stepped to the edge of the porch, putting her hand on Eli's arm. She looked at the sheriff with a steady, defiant gaze. "I am Clara Walker," she said loud and clear. "This is my husband. We have lived here since the spring of '76. We want no trouble." Brady studied her. He looked at her worn clothes, her hands stained with garden soil. The way she touched Eli, it looked real. But Brady was a cynical man. "You have papers?" Brady asked. "A marriage certificate?" "A circuit preacher married us." Clara lied. "The papers were lost in a fire 2 winters ago." Brady chewed on his mustache. He looked at Eli. "You are a lucky man. Walker, if that is your name?" "It is," Eli said. "Then you won't mind if we look around," Vance said, spurring his horse forward. "Check the barn. Check the root cellar. See if you have any fresh digging sites." Eli shifted the rifle. "You set 1 foot on those steps, and I will blow it off." The click of hammers being cocked rippled through the group. The 2 deputies drew their pistols. Vance pulled a sawed-off shotgun from a scabbard. "That sounds like resisting arrest." Vance smiled. "Back off," Brady ordered his men, raising a hand. He looked at Eli. "We will camp down by the creek. Walker, I'm going to send a rider to Cheyenne to check the land deeds. If you are who you say you are, you have nothing to worry about. If you are Kane, well, you won't leave this valley alive." Brady turned his horse. "Let's go, boys. We will wait for him out." They rode down the trail, setting up camp just out of rifle range, blocking the only exit from the canyon. Eli and Clara went back inside. Eli barred the door. He slumped against the wood, exhaling a breath he had held for 10 minutes. "They didn't believe me," Clara said, her voice trembling. "No," Eli said. "Brady is too smart. He knows. He is just waiting for reinforcements. Or for me to make a mistake." "We have to run tonight," Clara said. "We can climb the back ridge on foot. Leave the horses." "The back ridge is a 1,000-foot drop," Eli said. "In the dark, we would fall. And if we didn't, Vance would track us by morning." He walked to the window and looked at the campfires flickering down by the creek. He turned back to her. His face was set in stone. "There is no running. Clara, not this time." "So we die?" she asked, tears spilling over. "We just wait here and die?" Eli crossed the room. He took her by the shoulders. He pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers. "I'm not going to let them touch you," he said. "I made a promise. To myself. And to you." "Eli," she sobbed. "Please." "I will kill them," he whispered. It was not a threat. It was a statement of fact. "I will kill them all if I have to. For you." He kissed her, hard and brief, then turned back to the window, the Sharps rifle heavy in his hands, watching the darkness for movement. The standoff lasted 2 days. It was a siege of silence and nerves, broken only by the occasional shout from the creek bed where Sheriff Brady and his men had dug in. They were waiting for the psychological weight of the situation to crush Eli Walker, or for the reinforcements from Laramie to arrive with a warrant that would give them the legal cover to storm the cabin. On the evening of the 2nd day, the wind shifted. It came howling down from the north, a dry, brittle gust that rattled the shingles and moaned through the chinking of the logs. Eli stood by the window, his eyes red-rimmed from lack of sleep. He watched the smoke rising from the sheriff's campfire. It was lazy smoke, confident smoke. "They are not leaving," Clara said. She was sitting at the table, cleaning the Navy Colt for the 10th time. Her hands had stopped shaking, replaced by a cold, focused dread. "No," Eli said. "And they have sent a rider out. I saw him slip away an hour ago. When he comes back, he will bring 20 men. They will burn us out. Then we fight," Clara said. "We die if we fight." Eli corrected her gently. He turned from the window. "We have to move. Tonight, the wind is our friend." He went to the corner where the kerosene tin stood. It was nearly full. He picked it up, the liquid sloshing heavily inside. He looked around the room, at the calico curtain she had hung, the rocking chair he had fixed, the bed where they had found solace in each other's arms. He was about to destroy the only peace he had known in a decade. "Pack the saddlebags," he ordered. "Food, ammunition, A blanket. Nothing else. We travel light. What are you doing? Clara asked. Standing up. Giving them what they want, Eli said. A body. Or the thought of one. He splashed the oil across the floorboards. He doused the bed. He threw the remainder over the pile of furs in the corner. The smell of petroleum was sharp and stinging, drowning out the scent of wood smoke and baking bread. When I light this, Eli said, his voice low and urgent, the roof will catch fast. The wind will drive the smoke right down the valley, into their faces. They won't be able to see the back ridge. We go out the root cellar hatch, behind the wood pile. We run for the timber. Clara looked at the cabin one last time. She touched the back of the chair. It was a good home, she whispered. It was just wood, Eli said, though his throat was tight. We are the home. He struck a match on his boot heel. The flame flared. Yellow and hungry. He dropped it. The whoosh of ignition was violent. Fire raced across the floor, climbing the walls with terrifying speed. The heat was instant and blistering. Eli grabbed Clara's hand and dragged her toward the back of the room. They dropped into the root cellar, scrambling through the dark, earthen tunnel that exited behind the cabin. They emerged into the night air, which was already thickening with black, acrid smoke. The wind caught the flames, whipping them into a frenzy. The cabin roared like a living thing. Now, Eli hissed. They ran. They kept the burning structure between themselves and the sheriff's camp. The smoke was a solid wall, stinging their eyes, filling their lungs, but it cloaked them perfectly. They hit the tree line just as the roof of the cabin collapsed inward with a thunderous crash, sending a geyser of sparks 100 feet into the air. Shouts erupted from the creek. Men were yelling, horses screaming. They think we are inside, Clara gasped, running hard at Eli's heels. Brady is not a fool, Eli grunted. Keep moving. They climbed. The terrain was brutal, loose shale and tangled underbrush that tore at their clothes. They scrambled up the spine of the ridge, putting distance between themselves and the inferno below. They were a mile out, high on a granite shelf. When the moon broke through the clouds, it was bad luck. The light turned the gray rock into a stage, and they were the actors. A shout came from below, not from the camp, but from the trail. Vance. The bounty hunter had anticipated a run. He had positioned himself on the flank. There! A voice screamed. The crack of a rifle shattered the night. A bullet whined off the rock inches from Eli's head, spraying stone fragments. Run! Eli roared, shoving Clara forward. More shots followed. Muzzle flashes bloomed in the dark timber below like angry fireflies. Eli spun, raising the sharps. He fired once, a booming report that rolled like thunder. A man screamed in the dark. Clara was scrambling over a deadfall, her breath tearing in her throat. She heard the whine of lead, the chaotic symphony of a skirmish. She felt a sudden, hot punch in her side, just above the hip. It didn't hurt, not at first. It felt like someone had poked her hard with a blunt stick. She stumbled, falling to her knees. Clara! Eli was there instantly, grabbing her arm. I fell, she gasped, trying to stand. I just fell. But when she stood, her legs felt like water. She put her hand to her side. It came away wet and black in the moonlight. Eli saw it. He didn't freeze, he didn't panic. He went cold, a glacial shift into pure violence. Can you walk? He demanded. Yes, she lied. Get to the trees, he ordered. Do not stop. He turned back toward the pursuers. He could hear them crashing through the brush. Close now, maybe 50 yards. There were 2 of them, separated from the main group. Eli dropped the heavy sharps. It was too slow for close work. He drew the Colt revolver. He moved not away from the danger, but toward it. He slipped into the shadow of a massive boulder. The first man came over the rise, winded, holding a carbine. It was one of the deputies. He never saw Eli. Eli stepped from the shadow and fired point blank. The deputy dropped without a sound. The second man was Vance. The bounty hunter was smarter. He hung back. He saw the flash of Eli's gun and fired blindly. The bullet tore through the sleeve of Eli's coat, grazing the skin. Eli did not flinch. He fan-fired the Colt, 3 shots in rapid succession, walking the fire toward the muzzle flash. There was a grunt, a curse, and the sound of a body sliding down loose gravel. Eli waited. Silence returned to the mountain, save for the distant roaring of the fire and the wind. He reloaded the Colt by feel, his hands steady. Then he turned and ran after Clara. He found her 100 yards up the trail. She was leaning against a pine tree, sliding slowly toward the ground. Her face was the color of old paper. "Eli," she whispered. He scooped her up. She was lighter than she should have been. The blood was soaking through her dress, staining his hands. "I have you," he said. "Hold on to me." The rain began an hour later. It was a cold, merciless deluge that turned the dust to mud and the rocks to ice. It washed away their tracks, which was a mercy. But it sucked the heat from their bodies. Eli carried her. He walked until his legs burned and his back screamed. He walked through the slide rock, through the swollen creeks, deeper into the wilderness where the map was blank. Clara drifted in and out of consciousness, her head lolling against his shoulder. "Tell me," she murmured, her voice slurred by shock and blood loss. "Tell me a story. We are going to a castle," Eli rasped, his breath coming in ragged hitches. "High in the rocks, warm and dry." "No," she whispered. "Tell me about the potatoes. Tell me about the garden." He told her. He talked to keep her awake, to keep her tethered to the world of the living. He walked for 5 miles, gaining 2,000 feet in elevation, until they reached the timberline where the air was thin and sharp. He found the cave by smell, the scent of bat guano and dry earth. It was a fissure in the limestone, narrow at the mouth but opening into a dry chamber. He laid her down on the stone floor. He collapsed beside her, his lungs heaving. He couldn't light a fire, not yet. He worked in the dark, his hands guided by touch. He cut away her dress. The bullet had passed through, entering above the hip bone and exiting the back. It had missed the gut, missed the spine, but she had lost a lot of blood. He packed the wound with moss he scraped from the rocks outside, binding it tight with strips torn from his own shirt. She cried out when he tightened the knot, a sharp, bird-like sound that cut him deeper than any knife. The fever came at dawn. For 3 days, time dissolved. The cave became a universe of heat and murmurs. Clara burned. Her skin was dry and hot to the touch, her body thrashing against the stone floor. Eli did not sleep. He ventured out only to gather water from a seep in the rocks, dripping it into her mouth from a leaf. He held her when she shook with chills. He pinned her down when she tried to run from the demons in her mind. She called out names he didn't know. "Mama," she wept. "Mama, don't let him take the wagon." She called out to God, begging for water. She called out to the brothel owner, screaming that she wouldn't do it. She wouldn't go upstairs. On the second night, she went quiet. Her breathing became shallow, a terrifying rattle in her chest. Eli lay beside her, wrapping his body around hers to share his heat. He buried his face in her hair, which was matted with sweat and dirt. "I am sorry," he whispered into the dark. "I am so sorry. Clara," he began to talk. He confessed it all, pouring the poison out of his soul in the hope that it might buy her peace. "I was not a bad man once," he whispered. "I had a farm. I had a dog. The man in Kansas. He didn't just cheat me. He laughed at my father's watch. He threw it in the spittoon. It was the only thing I had left of him. I didn't mean to kill him. I just wanted him to stop laughing." Clara didn't move. "I ran," he continued, the tears finally coming, hot and silent. "I ran because I was a coward. I should have hanged. But I ran to the mountains. I thought I could hide from God up here. But he found me. He sent you to judge me." He kissed her forehead. It was burning. "Don't die," he begged. "You can hate me. You can leave me. But don't die. Please, Clara, fight." She turned her head. Her eyes opened, but they were unseeing, glazed with delirium. She looked right through him. "Eli," she croaked. "I'm here. The shirt," she whispered. "I want the shirt." He stripped off his flannel shirt, leaving himself in his undershirt in the freezing cave. He tucked it around her, pulling the collar up to her chin. She sighed, burying her nose in the fabric. Her breathing slowed. She slept. On the fourth morning, the fever broke. It happened as the sun hit the mouth of the cave. Clara shifted, and her skin, which had been dry as parchment, was suddenly damp with cool sweat. Her eyes opened, and this time, the fog was gone. They were weak, rimmed with dark circles, but they were clear. She looked at the stone ceiling. She looked at Eli, who was sitting against the wall, whittling a piece of stick to keep his hands busy, looking like a man who had aged 20 years in a week. "You look terrible," she whispered. The stick fell from Eli's hands. He scrambled over to her, hovering, afraid to touch her. "Clara." "Thirsty," she said. He brought the water. She drank greedily. She tried to sit up, but gasped as the pain in her side flared. "Lie still," he commanded, his voice cracking. "You were shot. We thought I lost you." He slumped forward, his forehead resting on her shoulder. His shoulders began to shake. The great, silent sobs of a man who had held back the ocean finally broke through the dam. He wept, clutching her hand, unashamed. Clara reached up. Her hand was weak, trembling, but she found his hair. She stroked the tangled mess. "Hush," she said. "Hush, Eli." "I almost got you killed," he choked out. "I am poison. Clara, everything I touch dies." "Look at me," she said. He raised his head. His face was wet, his eyes red. "I am not dead," she said firmly. "And I am not leaving." "Why?" he asked. "Why would you stay with a man like me?" She looked at him, her gray eyes fierce. "Because you saved me before I knew I wanted to live," she said. "Back in the snow? You saved me then. You saved me now. We are even." When she was strong enough to walk with a crutch he fashioned from a pine branch, they moved on. They could not stay in the cave. There was no food. They traveled higher, crossing the scree slopes to the abandoned mining district on the far side of the peak. They found a shack. It was a relic of the gold rush, clinging to the side of the cliff like a barnacle. The roof was half gone, and the door was missing, but the walls were thick timber and there was a cast iron stove that still worked. They rebuilt. It was harder this time. They had no tools but Eli's knife and a rusted shovel head they found in the slag pile. They wove pine boughs to patch the roof. They packed mud into the cracks. Summer turned to autumn. The aspens in the valley below turned to gold, flaming torches against the dark green of the pines. Eli hunted every day. He took deer and elk, careful to use the knife when he could to save ammunition. Clara skinned the animals. She stretched the hides, scraping them clean, stitching them together with sinew to make blankets and coats. She cooked stews of meat and wild onions. They were surviving, but the dynamic had changed. Eli became suffocating. He would not let her gather wood alone. He would not let her walk more than 10 yards from the shack. He watched the horizon with a paranoia that bordered on madness. He treated her like glass that had already shattered once. It came to a head on a windy afternoon in October. Clara picked up the water bucket. "I am going to the spring," she said. "I will go," Eli said, stepping in front of her. He reached for the bucket. Clara pulled it back. "I can carry water. Eli, the wound is healed." "It is steep," he said. "You might slip." "I am not an invalid," she snapped. "And I am not a child." "I am just trying to keep you safe," he said, his voice rising. "You are trying to keep me in a cage," she shouted, slamming the bucket down. The water splashed over his boots. "We escaped the fire. We escaped the sheriff. But you are building a prison right here." "Because I can't lose you again," Eli roared back. He grabbed her shoulders. "You don't know what it was like, watching you die in that cave. I won't go back to that." "Then stop treating me like a victim." Clara shoved him. It was a hard shove, with all her strength. "I am the woman who walked through the snow. I am the woman who took a bullet and walked 5 miles. I am your partner." Elias Kane, not your ward." Eli stared at her. Her chest was heaving, her eyes blazing. She looked wild and magnificent and terrifying. The anger in his face broke, replaced by a sudden, searing heat. He didn't speak. He grabbed her. He pulled her to him, his mouth finding hers with a force that was almost violent. She didn't pull away. She met him, her hands tangling in his hair, pulling him down. They fell onto the pile of furs near the stove. It was not the gentle lovemaking of the spring. It was a rough, desperate assertion of life. It was a battle. She bit his lip. He gripped her hips, pulling her against him until there was no space left between them. They tore at each other's clothes, needing skin, needing friction, needing to prove that they were both strong, both alive, both here. When it was over, they lay tangled in the furs, the sweat cooling on their skin. The fire in the stove popped. Eli traced the scar on her side with his thumb. It was a puckered, pink starburst. "I am sorry," he whispered. "Don't be," she said, resting her head on his chest. "Just let me carry the water." He chuckled, a low rumble in his chest. "Fine. You carry the water, I will chop the wood." "Deal," she said. They lay there for a long time, listening to the wind. "We could stay here," Eli said quietly. "Through the winter, in the spring, we could go to Oregon. There is land there, deep timber. No one asks questions. A homestead," Clara mused, "with real windows." "And chickens," Eli added. "You like the chickens?" "And a cradle," Clara said softly. Eli went still. "A cradle? Maybe," she said, tracing a pattern on his chest. "Someday, if we stop running." "I would like that," Eli said, his voice thick with emotion. "A boy or a girl. It doesn't matter. Just peace." For the first time, the word didn't feel like a lie. They drifted into a doze, daring to imagine a world where the gun on the table was just a tool, not a lifeline. Later that evening, Eli went out to check the snares. Clara stayed behind to start supper. She saw his coat hanging on the nail by the door. It was torn from the escape, the lining ripping out. "I should stitch that," she thought. She took the coat down. As she turned it inside out to get at the seam, something fell from the inside pocket. It was a piece of folded paper, stiff and yellowed. Clara frowned. Eli never carried papers. She picked it up. It was stained with dirt and a dark smear of dried blood, likely from the night on the ridge. It must have come from the saddlebag of the deputy Eli had killed, or perhaps Vance. Eli must have grabbed it, thinking it was a map, and forgotten it. She unfolded it. It was a wanted poster, standard issue, bold black type, wanted for murder. She expected to see Eli's face. She expected to see the name Elias Kane, but the face on the poster was a woman's. It was a sketch, crude but recognizable, the high cheekbones, the dark hair. Clara Miller wanted for the murder of Thomas O'Malley. Saloon owner Cheyenne. Wyoming reward, $500. Clara stared at the paper. O'Malley, the brothel owner, the man who had bought her from her stepfather, the man who had beaten her. She hadn't killed him. She had run. She had hit him with a pitcher when he tried to force himself on her, and she had jumped out the window. He had been alive when she left, cursing, bleeding, but alive. Someone had finished the job, and they had pinned it on her. The paper shook in her hands. She wasn't just a runaway anymore. She wasn't just a victim fleeing a bad situation. She was a murderer in the eyes of the law. The door opened. Eli stepped in, carrying 2 rabbits. He was smiling, the tension gone from his shoulders. "Found a good spot near the—" He stopped. He saw her face. He saw the paper in her hand. Clara looked up at him, her eyes wide with a new kind of horror. "I didn't do it," she whispered, holding up the poster. "Eli, I swear, I didn't kill him." Eli dropped the rabbits. He walked over and took the paper. He read it in the dim light. His face hardened, the smile vanishing into the mask of the gunman. "I believe you," he said. "They want me dead," she said. "Prison or the rope?" That is why Vance was here. Not just for you. For me. Eli crumbled the paper in his fist. He looked at the woman he loved. The woman who wanted a cradle and chickens and peace. Then we have a problem, Eli said, his voice cold steel. Because no one puts a rope on you while I'm drawing breath. The wanted poster lay on the rough pine table between them like a declaration of war. Clara's hand was still resting on it, her fingers trembling slightly, but her voice had steadied. I did not kill him, she repeated, looking into Eli's eyes. O'Malley was alive when I went out the window. I hit him with the water pitcher because he would not stop tearing at my dress. He fell back. He was cursing me. I heard him shouting as I hit the ground. Eli studied her face. He saw the terror there, but he also saw the truth. He knew the look of a killer. He saw it in the mirror every morning. Clara did not have it. If he was alive when you left, Eli said slowly, then someone else finished the job. There was a partner, Clara said, her brow furrowing as the memory sharpened. A man named Silas. No, not the tracker. A silent man. Dutch. He wanted the deed to the building. I saw him on the stairs as I ran down. He didn't try to stop me. He just watched me run. And then he went up. Eli nodded. The pieces fit. A dead partner. A missing girl to take the blame. And a clear path to ownership. It was an old story in the West, written in greed and blood. I am going to Cheyenne, Eli said. Clara stood up so fast her chair tipped over. No, you cannot go back there. They will hang you. They won't, Eli said, though he wasn't sure of it himself. I need a witness. This man, Dutch. Does he have enemies? Is there anyone who worked there who might have seen the truth? Clara thought for a moment. Martha. She ran the linens. She lived in the room next to the office. The walls were paper thin. She heard everything. She always heard everything. Where is she now? She talked about leaving, Clara said. She wanted to open a laundry on 17th Street. She saved every penny. Eli checked the load in his revolver. I will find her. I will bring her to the judge. I am coming with you, Clara said, reaching for her coat. Eli caught her wrist. No, you are wanted for murder. If they see you, they shoot. If they see me, I am just a drifter until proven otherwise. You stay here. You keep the fire low. You wait for me. He handed her the Navy Colt. If anyone comes who is not me, you go to the root cellar. You hide. If they find you, you empty this into them. He kissed her then, a hard, fierce press of lips that tasted of desperation. He mounted the roan horse and rode out before the sun had fully crested the peaks, leaving her standing in the doorway of the broken shack. The heavy pistol weighed down in her skirt pocket. Cheyenne had changed in 10 years. It was no longer just a tent city of mud and sin. It was becoming a metropolis of brick and iron. The streets were wide, crowded with freight wagons and carriages. The air smelled of coal smoke and money. Eli rode with his hat pulled low. He stabled the horse at a livery on the outskirts, paying extra for discretion. He walked into town as the gas lamps were flickering to life against the twilight. He felt the weight of the city pressing on him. Too many eyes. Too many laws. He found the laundry on 17th Street. It was a small, steam-filled storefront with windows fogged by heat. Inside, women were bent over scrubbing boards, their arms red to the elbows. He spotted her instantly from Clara's description, a stout woman with hair the color of iron, moving with a brisk, no-nonsense efficiency. Eli stepped inside. The bell above the door jingled. Martha looked up. She wiped her hands on her apron. We are closed, Mr. Come back Tuesday. I am not here for a shirt, Eli said, keeping his voice low. I am here for Clara. Martha went still. The other women didn't notice, lost in the hiss of steam and the rhythm of the work. She walked around the counter, her eyes narrowing. Who are you? She whispered. A friend, Eli said. She is alive, but they are going to hang her for O'Malley. Good riddance to O'Malley, Martha spat. But Clara, I knew that girl would run. I told her to run. She says you heard what happened, Eli said. She says you know she didn't do it. Martha looked at the door, then back at Eli. Fear flickered in her eyes. Dutch owns this town now. He owns the saloon, the hotel, and half the deputies. If you don't talk, Eli said, stepping closer. An innocent woman dies, and Dutch won. He saw the conflict in her face. Martha was a survivor, but she was not cruel. She remembered the bruises on Clara's arms. She remembered the nights Clara had cried herself to sleep through the thin wall. I heard him, Martha whispered. I heard the pitcher break. I heard Clara run, and then I heard Dutch walk in. I heard O'Malley ask for a doctor, and I heard the gunshot, just one. Then Dutch walked out and started yelling for the police. Will you say that to a judge? Eli asked. Martha took a deep breath. She untied her apron. I have a sister in Denver. I was meaning to visit her. If you can get me out of this town after, I will say it. Deal, Eli said. Let's go. Now. They moved toward the door. Eli's hand was on the latch when the glass shattered. The front window exploded inward. A bullet took a chunk out of the door frame inches from Eli's head. He threw Martha to the floor, drawing his Colt in a blur of motion. Back door, he shouted. He shoved her toward the rear of the shop. Outside, shadows were moving on the street. Dutch had protection. Someone had seen the stranger asking questions. They burst into the alley. It was dark, cluttered with trash barrels and crates. Eli grabbed Martha's arm, pulling her toward the mouth of the alley that led to the livery stable. A figure stepped out from behind a stack of crates. It wasn't a hired thug. It was Sheriff Brady. The lawman from the mountains had not given up. He had ridden to Cheyenne to check the records, just as he promised, and fate had put him in the alley. Walker, Brady said. He held a shotgun leveled at Eli's chest. Or should I say, Kane. Let the woman go, Eli said, shielding Martha. She has nothing to do with this. She looks like a witness to me, Brady said calmly. And you look like a man who is tired of running. I'm not running, Eli said. I am trying to set a thing right. By shooting up the laundry. Brady shook his head. Put the gun down. Son, it is over. Eli looked at Martha. She was trembling. If he surrendered, Dutch's men would get to her before she ever saw a courtroom. Clara would hang. It is never over, Eli said. He didn't raise the gun. He kicked the crate next to him. It flew at Brady. A sudden, desperate projectile. Brady flinched, the shotgun discharging into the mud of the alley floor. Eli launched himself. He slammed into the older man, driving him back against the brick wall. It was not a graceful fight. It was a brawl of desperation. They grappled for the shotgun. Brady was strong, with the leverage of old man's strength, but Eli was fighting for Clara's life. Eli drove a knee into Brady's stomach. The sheriff wheezed, his grip loosening. Eli tore the shotgun away and tossed it aside, but Brady pulled a knife from his boot. The blade flashed in the moonlight. Eli threw up his arm. The steel bit deep into his forearm, slicing through the coat and into the muscle. Eli roared, a sound of pain and fury. He grabbed Brady's wrist, twisting it with a bone-breaking torque. The knife clattered to the stones. Eli struck him once, a hard right cross to the jaw. Brady's legs buckled. He slid down the wall, dazed, blood trickling from his mouth. Eli stood over him, clutching his bleeding arm. He picked up his Colt. Don't, Brady wheezed, looking up. Don't add another one to the list. Kane, I didn't kill him, Eli panted, looking down at the lawman. The man in Kansas, 10 years ago, I didn't kill him. Brady looked at him, his eyes clearing. He spat blood onto the cobblestones. He started to laugh. It was a dry, raspy chuckle. I know, Brady said. Eli froze. What? I checked the records, you fool. Brady coughed. That is why I came to town. The man you beat, his name was Miller. He didn't die. He spent a month in a coma, woke up with a limp and a slur. But he lived. He died of a burst appendix 4 years later. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Eli stared at the sheriff. He lived? He lived, Brady said. There was never a murder warrant. Kane, just assault. and the governor issued a blanket pardon for all pre-70 crimes for veterans 2 years ago. You have been running from a ghost. Eli felt the strength go out of his legs. 10 years. 10 years of looking over his shoulder. 10 years of hiding in the snow. For nothing. Go! Brady groaned, waving a hand. Get your witness. Dutch's men are coming down the street. I will slow them down. I hate a man who hits women more than I hate a drifter. Eli looked at the sheriff. He nodded once. A silent accord passed between warriors. Thank you, Eli whispered. He grabbed Martha and ran. They reached the livery as the shouts behind them grew louder. They rode double on the roan, tearing out of Cheyenne into the black embrace of the prairie. High in the mountains, the silence was not peaceful. It was predatory. Clara sat in the corner of the mining shack, the Navy Colt heavy in her lap. She had not slept. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of the wind sounded like footsteps. They came at midnight. She heard the horses first, the iron shoes clinking on the granite scree. Then the voices. Not Eli's voice, rough, confident voices. Smoke, a man said. Chimney is still warm. He is here. Clara moved. She didn't think. She flowed into the plan Eli had drilled into her. She blew out the candle. She scrambled to the back of the shack, where the floorboards were rotted through. She lifted the loose planks and dropped into the crawl space beneath. It wasn't a root cellar like the cabin. It was just a hole in the dirt, smelling of mold and rats. She pulled the planks back into place just as the door was kicked in. Dust sifted down onto her face. She held her breath, pressing the pistol against her chest to keep her heart from thumping loud enough to be heard. Boots thumped on the floorboards above her head. Heavy, spurred boots. Empty, a voice growled. Bedroll is here, another said. And a woman's coat. He ain't alone. Check the perimeter. They can't be far. One of the men walked right over her head. The rotted wood groaned. Clara squeezed her eyes shut, her finger tightening on the trigger. Squeeze like a lemon. Eli had said, don't pull. If the board broke, she would shoot up. She would kill the man who fell through. She would not go back to the room with the pitcher. She would not go back to the life of a victim. The man stopped. He stood there for an eternity. Dirt drifted into Clara's eye, stinging, but she did not blink. She did not breathe. Let's ride, the man said finally. We will cut the sign at daybreak. They are on foot. The footsteps receded. The door creaked in the wind. Then, silence. Clara stayed in the hole for an hour. Only when the moon had moved across the crack in the floor did she dare to push the plank up. She climbed out, covered in filth, shaking so hard her teeth rattled. She sat with her back to the wall, the gun aimed at the door, and waited for the sun. It was late afternoon when the roan horse appeared on the trail. Clara saw two figures. Panic flared. Had they caught him? But then she saw the red buffalo coat. She saw the way he sat in the saddle. She ran out. She forgot the danger. She forgot the gun. She ran down the rocky slope. Eli slid from the horse. He stumbled when he hit the ground, his left arm bound in a bloody rag. But he was grinning. It was the same grin from the woodpile, only wider, wilder. Eli! She crashed into him, burying her face in his good shoulder. I have her, Eli rasped, holding her tight with his good arm. He nodded to the woman sliding awkwardly from the horse's rump. Clara, this is Martha. Martha dusted off her skirt, looking at the wild surroundings with distaste, but looking at Clara with warmth. Hello, dearie. You look like hell. I found her, Eli said, pulling back to look at Clara. His eyes were shining with a strange, feverish light. And I found something else. You are hurt, Clara said, touching his bandaged arm. It is just a scratch, he said. Clara, listen to me. The man in Kansas, he didn't die. Clara froze. What? He lived, Eli said, laughter bubbling up in his chest, bordering on hysteria. I am not a murderer. I never was. The sheriff told me there is a pardon. I'm free. My name is clean. Clara stared at him. She saw the weight of 10 years drop from his shoulders. She saw the shadow that had always been behind his eyes vanish. You are free? She whispered. We are free, he said. "Martha is going to tell the judge about Dutch, and then we are going to walk out of that courthouse, and no one will ever chase us again." He kissed her then, ignoring the pain in his arm, ignoring the cold wind. He kissed her like a man who had just been given his life back. The return to Cheyenne was done in the open. They did not sneak. They rode down the main street at noon, Eli sitting tall on the roan, Clara and Martha in a hired wagon behind him. They went straight to the courthouse. Sheriff Brady met them at the steps. He had a bandage on his jaw, and his arm was in a sling, but he nodded to Eli. "You brought her," Brady said. "I keep my word." Eli said, "The hearing was done in the judge's chambers, away from the prying eyes of the press." Martha told her story. She spoke clearly, driven by the promise of a train ticket to Denver and a new start. She described the argument, the picture, and the single gunshot after Clara had fled. The judge, a stern man with mutton chop whiskers, listened. He looked at the affidavit Brady had prepared. He looked at Clara. "The warrant is quashed," the judge said, banging his gavel on the desk. "Defense of self is clear regarding the assault, and the murder charge is dismissed based on witness testimony. A warrant will be issued for the arrest of the man known as Dutch." He looked at Eli. "And as for you, Mr. Kane, or Walker, try to stay out of my alleyways." "Yes, sir," Eli said. They walked out into the sunlight. It was blinding. The air tasted sweet, but as they walked down the boardwalk, heads turned. People whispered. The story of the mountain man and the runaway girl had spread. The fight in the alley was already legendary. Dutch's men were still out there, and though the law was on their side, vengeance had its own rules. "We can't stay here," Eli said quietly, watching a man across the street watch them. "I know," Clara said, "but we don't have to run today." That evening, the sun set in a riot of purple and gold. They walked out of town, past the last row of houses, to a solitary cottonwood tree that stood by the creek. Eli reached into his pocket. He pulled out a small object wrapped in brown paper. "I sold the roan saddle," he said. "I can ride bareback for a while." He handed it to her. Clara opened the paper. Inside was a ring. It was silver, simple and unadorned, beaten from a coin by a jeweler on 16th Street. "It is not much," Eli said, scuffing his boot in the dirt. "But it is clean, no blood on it." Clara looked at the ring, then at him. "It is perfect." She slid it onto her finger. "It fits." They sat beneath a tree as the stars came out. The lights of Cheyenne flickered in the distance, a world they were part of. Yet apart from, they were not civilized people. They were forged in the high country, tempered by snow and violence. Eli leaned back against the bark, his injured arm resting in his lap. Clara curled up beside him. She was wearing his shirt again, the red and black flannel soft against her cheek. It was too big, too warm, and smelled of home. She listened to his heartbeat. It was slow and steady. She closed her eyes. She knew that the world was still dangerous. She knew that Dutch might send men. She knew that winter would come again. But she also knew the man she was leaning against. She knew he could track a man through a blizzard. She knew he could kill at 400 yards to save her. She knew he would burn down his own house to keep her warm. She fell asleep in his shirt, her hand resting over his heart, loving him not in spite of the violence he was capable of, but because of it. He was her wolf, and she was his, and that was enough. They rode west until the plains gave way to the foothills, and the foothills rose into the jagged, white-capped spine of the Bitterroot Mountains. It was the summer of 1880. The air in Montana Territory tasted different, thinner, sharper, smelling of pine resin and glacier water. It was a place where a man could get lost, or if he was lucky, found. They bought 300 acres of bottomland along a nameless tributary of the Clark Fork River. They paid in gold, coin by coin. Money Eli had saved from a lifetime of trapping and the sale of the roan horse back in Cheyenne. The deed was signed not by Eli Walker and Clara Miller, but by James and Sarah Morgan. James, Clara said, testing the name as they stood knee-deep in the tall, green grass of their new valley. It sounds serious. It is a good name, Eli said, looking at the mountains that walled them in. A quiet name, a name that doesn't have a price on it. He built the cabin himself, feeling the lodgepole pines that grew straight and true on the north slope. This was not the rough, desperate shelter of the Wyoming winter, nor the scavenged mining shack of their exile. This was a home. He notched the logs with the precision of a master craftsman, ensuring the fit was tight enough to keep out the wind and the sorrow. He laid a floor of split planks, sanded smooth with river stones so she would never catch a splinter in her bare feet. Clara claimed the space before the roof was even finished. She traded labor with a neighbor 10 miles down the road, swapping mending work for 6 laying hens and a rooster. She planted a garden, not out of desperation this time, but with an eye for beauty. She put the potatoes in the back, but near the porch, she planted wild iris and columbine she dug up from the riverbank. Inside, she mixed crushed berries and clay with milk to create a wash of color. She painted the rough log walls with vines of wildflowers that would never fade. Even when the snow was 5 feet deep, she made the cabin bloom. Their life fell into a rhythm that was sweet and terrifying in its normalcy. Eli worked the land, clearing stumps and cutting hay. Clara tended the chickens, gathered herbs, yarrow for fever, willow bark for pain, and baked bread in a cast-iron Dutch oven. The love between them, once a frantic, desperate thing born of adrenaline and blood, deepened into something steady. It was the difference between a flash flood and a deep river. In the evenings, after the work was done, they would sit on the porch in 2 rocking chairs Eli had built. Clara would sing, her voice drifting out over the darkening meadow. She sang old ballads, songs about love that endured shipwrecks and wars. Eli would listen, whittling toys he had no use for, tiny horses, wooden ducks, just to keep his hands busy. One night, as the harvest moon rose heavy and orange, Clara sat between his legs on the porch steps. Eli brushed her hair. His large, scarred hands, once so clumsy with the braid, had learned the landscape of her scalp. He drew the brush through the dark silk, rhythmic and slow. "You are humming," he said softly. "I am happy," she answered, leaning back against his chest. She could feel the slow, strong beat of his heart through his shirt. "Is that allowed, James Morgan?" "I think so," he said, kissing the top of her head. "I think we paid for it." They spoke of a child in hushed tones, as if saying it too loud might jinx the possibility. They tried, with a silent, reverent intensity, making love in the bed Eli had built from heavy oak. The ropes tightened to hold their weight. There was no urgency now, only a profound exploration of the peace they had carved out of the wilderness. But the past is a shadow that lengthens when the sun gets low. It arrived in late September, not with a posse, but in the form of a single rider. He came up the valley road on a gray gelding, sitting upright in the saddle with the posture of a man used to giving orders. Eli was chopping wood. He saw the rider a mile out. He didn't run for the rifle leaning against the porch rail. He simply sank the axe into the chopping block and waited. The rider pulled up. He was an older man, his face lined like a dried riverbed, his eyes pale and watchful. He wore a coat of fine wool and a hat that had cost more than Eli's wagon. There was no badge on his chest, but the ghost of one seemed to hang there. "Afternoon," the stranger said. "Afternoon," Eli replied. "Fine piece of land," the man said, looking around. "You have done good work, Mr. Morgan, is it?" "That is the name on the deed," Eli said. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Deeds are just paper. Faces. Faces are harder to change." He leaned forward, resting his hands on the saddle horn. "I knew a man once, in Kansas, big man, had that same scar on his forehead. Name of Cain." Eli went very still. "I heard Cain was pardoned." "For the assault, yes," the man said. "But the law is a tricky thing. There are always other matters, unresolved matters. A man named Grimes found dead in Wyoming." "A shootout in a Cheyenne alley where a sheriff was assaulted?" Self-defense, Eli said, his voice low. And the Grimes matter? There were no witnesses. I am a witness to what you are, the man said. My name is Thorne. I used to be a marshal in the territory. I am retired now, but I still have friends. I still have a sense of order. Clara stepped out onto the porch. She wiped her hands on her apron. She didn't look afraid. She looked angry. Can we help you, sir? She asked. Thorne tipped his hat. Just leaving, ma'am. I was just telling your husband that this valley likes quiet people. People with no history. He looked back at Eli. If I was a man like you, I would pack up. I would keep moving. Because if you stay, well, a man like me might feel obligated to ride to Helena and have a talk with the federal judge. Trials are messy things, even for pardoned men. He didn't wait for an answer. He turned the gray horse and rode back the way he came, a black figure against the golden grass. Eli stood by the chopping block for a long time. That night, the silence in the cabin was brittle. Eli paced the floor, the vibration of his boots shaking the oil in the lamp. We leave, he said. Tonight, we can cross the pass into Idaho before the snow flies. Clara sat at the table, mending a sock. She didn't look up. No? Clara, he knows. He's going to bring the law down on us. Not because I'm guilty, but because he wants to. I don't care, Clara said. She drove the needle through the wool. I am done running. Eli, I am done changing my name. I am done looking at every stranger like he is the devil. I cannot protect you in a cell, Eli said, slamming his hand on the table. I cannot protect you if they hang me for something I didn't do, just because I look like a killer. Clara stood up. She walked to him and placed her hands on his chest. Look around you. Look at the walls. Look at the garden. We made this. It is ours. If we run now, we run forever. We become ghosts. I would rather be a ghost than see you alone. He whispered. I won't be alone, she said fiercely. Because you are staying. You are James Morgan, a rancher in the Bitterroot. And we are not going to let one bitter old man steal our life. Eli looked at her. He saw the steel in her spine, the same steel that had carried her through the snow. He let out a long, shuddering breath. Okay, he said. We stay. 3 days later, a neighbor rode by. He stopped to talk to Eli at the fence line. Did you hear? The neighbor asked. That fellow Thorne, the retired lawman? What about him? Eli asked, pulling his gloves off. Found him dead this morning, down in Deadman's Gulch. Looks like his horse threw him. Broken neck, clean snap. Eli stared at the neighbor. Is that so? Bad luck, the neighbor said, shaking his head. That horse of his looked skittish. Well, see you at church. James. Eli walked back to the cabin. He sat on the porch steps. He looked at his hands. They were steady, calloused, stained with dirt and pitch. Clara came out. She had heard. She stood behind him. Eli? She asked quietly. He didn't turn. He is dead. The horse threw him. Clara was silent. She looked at the back of his neck. She thought of the night before, when Eli had gone out to check the stock, claiming a wolf was near the pen. He had been gone for 2 hours. He had come back sweating, though the night was cool. Did the horse throw him? She asked. Her voice was very small. Eli turned then. He looked at her. His eyes were dark pools, unreadable, ancient. I was here. Clara, I was checking the fence. You were gone a long time, she whispered. I was here, he repeated. He reached out to take her hand. As he held her fingers, a tremor went through his hand. It was a violent, uncontrollable shake. His knuckles vibrated against her skin. It was the shake of a man holding back a scream, or the shake of a man who had just wrestled with God and won. He didn't confess, he didn't boast. He just held her hand, shaking, until she covered his trembling fingers with her own and squeezed. Okay, she said. You were here. They never spoke of Thorne again. The grave in the town cemetery was filled, and the winter winds blew over it, burying the threat under 6 feet of earth and silence. November brought the first heavy frost. The world turned silver and brittle, but inside the cabin, there was a new warmth. Clara found him in the barn, milking the cow. She stood in the doorway, wrapped in a shawl. "James," she said. He looked up, the steam from the milk bucket rising around him. "Yeah? I think we are going to need that cradle," she said. Eli let go of the udder. The cow kicked, but he didn't notice. He stood up slowly. "Are you sure?" "I have been sick every morning for a week," she said, a smile breaking across her face like sunrise. "And my dress, the buttons are tight." Eli crossed the barn in 2 strides. He lifted her off the ground, spinning her around, burying his face in her neck. He laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy that startled the horses. "A baby," he murmured. "A baby." They prepared for winter with a frantic, joyful energy. Eli hunted elk, filling the smokehouse with enough meat to feed a regiment. He chopped wood until the stack was higher than the eaves of the cabin. He sealed every crack, every draft, making the cabin a fortress against the cold. One evening, just before the first true blizzard was predicted to hit, the air grew heavy and still. The sky was a sheet of iron gray. They went to bed early. The fire was banked high, casting a golden glow over the room. Clara lay back against the pillows, her belly just beginning to show the curve of new life. Eli undressed slowly. He looked at her, at the scar on her side, now faded to white, at the silver ring on her finger, at the swell of her stomach. She was the landscape of his redemption. He came to her. They made love slowly, with a tenderness that was almost painful. There was no need for words. His hands moved over her changing body with wonder, tracing the curve of her hip, the weight of her breasts, the place where his child was growing. He looked into her eyes. He saw fear there, the fear of birth, the fear of the winter. But he also saw hope, and in his own eyes, she saw the promise of a man who would tear the world apart to keep them safe. "I love you," he whispered against her skin. "I know," she answered. "The snow began at midnight. It fell for 3 days straight, burying the Bitterroot Valley in a silence so profound it felt like the beginning of the world. The labor started 2 weeks later, in the heart of the storm. It was a long, hard night." Eli did not know how to be a midwife, but he knew how to be steady. He held her hands when the pain took her. He wiped her brow with cool clothes. He whispered to her, telling her stories of the spring, of the wildflowers she had painted, of the life they would have. At dawn, the cry came. It was thin and angry, a protest against the cold air. Eli held his son. The boy was small, red-faced, and perfect. He had Clara's dark hair and Eli's chin. Eli washed the baby in warm water, wrapped him in a soft blanket made from the best of the deer hides, and laid him in Clara's arms. She was exhausted, pale, her hair matted to her forehead, but her eyes were bright. "He is beautiful," she whispered. "He is strong," Eli said. Clara shivered. The fire had burned low during the chaos of the birth. "I am cold," she said. Eli didn't grab a blanket. He went to the peg by the door. He took down the red and black flannel shirt. It was worn now, patched at the elbows, soft from 1,000 washings. He helped her sit up. He slipped her arms into the sleeves. She pulled it around her, buttoning it over her chest, tucking the baby inside the warmth of the wool. She buried her nose in the collar. It smelled of wood smoke, of pine, of safety. She looked at Eli. "Come to bed." "In a minute," he said. Eli walked to the door. He picked up the Winchester rifle. It was a habit, an instinct he couldn't break. He unbarred the door and stepped out onto the porch. The world was white. The snow was piled 4 feet deep, covering the fence, the wood pile, the path to the road. The storm had broken, and the sun was rising, turning the valley into a blinding field of diamonds. Eli stood there, the cold air biting his face. He looked at the horizon. He scanned the tree line. He looked for the shape of a rider, the glint of a badge, the shadow of the past. There was nothing. No bounty hunters, no sheriffs, no ghosts. Just the wind in the pines and the smoke rising from his own chimney. He stood there for a long time, the rifle heavy in his hand. But this time, he didn't have to raise it. This time, he didn't have to kill. He turned back to the door. He looked inside. Clara was asleep, her cheek resting on the top of the baby's head. She was wearing his shirt. Eli Walker unloaded the rifle. He set it down in the corner, not near the door, but back in the shadows. He walked to the bed, lay down beside his wife and son, and for the first time in his life, he closed both eyes. The storm stayed distant, and their love, forged in violence and tenderness, survived. Thank you for listening to the story of Eli and Clara. It has been a journey through the snow and the blood, all the way to the peace of the Montana mountains. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below telling me where you are listening from. Did you think Eli really let the lawman fall, or did he protect his family one last time? If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing to From Wild West. We have many more tales of the frontier, of love and survival, waiting for you. Share your thoughts in the comments, and until next time, keep your powder dry.